To me, the university will always be a special place, an ideal place, a shining city on a hill, devoted to the life of the mind, the search for truth, guided by reason, protective of free speech, tolerant of differences, a place where ideas are the coin of the realm, a community of research, scholarship, teaching, learning, and service. Painted, built houses, and when I was doing my master's degree in seminary, for those 2 years I drove a garbage truck. And I came home one day and the trash cans were out in front of the student duplex that we rented. And I said, "Christy, what are you doing?" She said, "Daddy, I'm a trash man like you." I guess I'm truly a child of the 60s. I graduated from high school in '64. And if you think about that era, it was a huge era of social change. You know, it was the period of Camelot. So that I was just going into high school when John F. Kennedy was elected. I was a senior in high school when he was assassinated, watching the dawning civil rights movement. And so all those things made me want to make the world a better place. My father was a minister. A lot of the people involved in the civil rights movement were ministers, including Martin Luther King. And so I thought, well, that's the way I can make the world a better place. So, so the first degree I did was in theology, with the intent to, become a minister. And the first position that I took was as director of youth ministries at a church. And but I knew I wanted to be involved in education, so I went back and did a second degree, and then took that position. We worked on this master's degree in education at Asbury Seminary that we were talking about when I was driving the garbage truck. And so out of that took a position as director of youth ministries for a group of 80-some churches. While doing that, was approached by the small college where I did my initial degree, Mount Vernon, and invited to become dean of students. So, so here in my late 20s, I became dean of students at a small college, and discovered that I was actually in a field. I had been an RA for 2 years as an undergrad. I'd had a real close relationship with the dean of students. I was real involved. I played 2 sports. I was on the yearbook, and the student newspaper, and all of those sorts of things. And so it wasn't a foreign sensibility, but I wasn't conscious of student affairs as a field. So after I took that position, I started going to some professional conferences and really discovered that student affairs had all the things that appealed to me in ministry, and it didn't have a lot of the things that I found increasingly difficult and frustrating. And then took a position as director of the commuter center at Ohio State, and which was an interesting experience. There's a few. While I was doing that, was approached by St. Louis University. They were creating a subset within student affairs called Human Development that they thought I would be a good match for, and so it was the Counseling Center, International Students, the Career Center, Student Conduct, always had student conduct, and orientations, a set of things like that, and then came from St. Louis here. There were several things. I mean, first of all, when I saw the opportunity, I knew of the reputation of Case Western Reserve, and in fact, when I was an undergrad, one of my friends had transferred from here, and actually had transferred from Case Institute because that was pre-merger. And the federation of Case and Western Reserve occurred while I was an undergrad, so I had been conscious of that over time. So just the reputation was attractive. And then when I came to interview, just the nature of the campus and the city. I recall when I flew back to St. Louis and Peggy and I talked, she said, "You like that place, and if they offer it, you're going to want to take the position, aren't you?" And I said, "I am." And she said, "But Glenn, Cleveland." and I responded, "It's really not that bad." At the time when I interviewed, I had the very clear sense that the university was at a crossroads, and we've experienced several of those, over time. But in 1985-86, they had formed something called the Ford Commission on Undergraduate Education, and Alan Ford was a member of the Board of Trustees and later became the chair. And that's where the name came from. But they, were looking at changing the fundamental model, because even though the university had federated, undergrads were either in Case Institute or Western Reserve College, and they literally had to transfer. There were separate academic affairs offices, etc. So they were going to move to a consolidated undergraduate experience with a single academic affairs office, which was initially called Collegiate Affairs and then became Undergraduate Studies, as you know it today. And so it was clearly the university was at a great moment in its history, and it just seemed like there was a real opportunity to be a part of something positive. It was one of those things. There was a certain risk because if the experiment didn't work well. Now, as it turned out, a few months after I accepted the position, Ag Pitta was selected as president, and then we went on this 12 years of real growth. And there was so much construction on campus that one year the students did this T-shirt for orientation. There was a map of the campus with piles of dirt every place. and I forget what the exact theme was, but it was a sort of a creative pardon our dust, because that's the whole middle of campus was torn up for the construction of the parking garage and KSL, and the biomedical research building was being built, and Mandel and Dively, and that was before we even got to PBL, and so there were so many projects through the 90s. When I arrived, director of housing, his name was Helga Orrick, and she told me that when I started that she was planning to retire at the end of the year, and so one of the first things would be to go out in a search for a director. And we knew that we needed a director who had experience with facilities. And so we found this young guy at Cornell who had a lot of facilities experience. And so in the summer of '87, hired Don Komolsky. This long-term plan in the context of an undergraduate student experience model that had at its core the notion that our undergraduate students are at a residential campus, and they ought to have a progressive experience with housing that's designed for their interest and needs, namely that first years shouldn't be isolated and scattered, but should be in double rooms where they start building relationships and be concentrated in what we first called the first year program, and then residential colleges. And that second years, and that we would staff those buildings most heavily, and then second years would be given more choices, including moving into a Greek house or moving into suite style housing. But what we didn't have was something that really spoke to the upper class experience. And part of the culmination of a long process was the Village at 115, because it was such an expression of the experience we wanted our students to have, and so many people were involved in the planning and the execution. And Ken Bash was then the VP for facilities and planning, and was a real partner, and Don really leading on the student affairs part of the facility side. Sue Nicholls Schindewolf leading this whole effort with staff on the development of the program, with tremendous student input. And the best part of it was part of this larger plan to replace all of our housing for the quality of the experience. And unfortunately, reality and a shaky economy intervened, and so those next phases haven't occurred. With building projects, you sort of have to get used to a need that's moving at the speed of light and a process that's moving at the speed of a glacier. There were already plans to build the field house, and they were trying to raise money to build the field house back in the late 80s. And then in, I think, 87 or 88, when athletics came over, that became part of our project. And it wasn't until the mid-90s that we actually were able to build Veal Center. It was a pressing need. The project with the longest gestation period of all has been the University Center, because that literally was part of our discussion in the first year that I was here. Twing Center, as it exists now, was an effort that was completed in 1982, I think, to do a relatively low-cost connection of two buildings that could kind of serve in the interim. And so getting the Veal Center, what is now going to be Veal University Center, off the ground was a forever sort of thing. And so it's really gratifying to see that coming to fruition.